And Senteon, your co-host from Senteon, joined by my co-host Rich from CIS, and we're here celebrating episode 35 of only 42 episodes before we get into browser hardening. So we are very much gearing up to completely cover a 1,500-page PDF to secure your workstations and servers. Hell of a journey, Rich.
Awesome.
And we've had some recurring guests. Today's guest is Tim Golden. Pleasure to have you back. Our first episode was extremely insightful because we were talking about the one step really before securing your assets is creating the policy. So loved that topic with you, but thanks for coming back. A lot has changed since we last caught up on air, Tim. You've rebranded your company. You're going to trade shows now with a booth. I mean, what's been going on with now compliance scorecard? Give us a little update.
Oh, nothing really. Kidding. So, Zach, thank you so much for having me again. Rich, good to see you again. CIS controls, is that a thing? I'm so excited to talk about this because, RDP, is that even why are we still having that conversation? So, but yes, I'm Tim Golden, founder of Now Compliance Scorecard, where we help MSPs build out their scorecards to build defensibility within their customers, operationalizing policies, procedures, assessments, and our biggest thing that we just released is full asset governance. I know I wasn't going to talk a lot about this, but we're really excited because that just came out. Partnering with people like Senteon, for example, and API integrations with multiple sources of truth, pulling that data into a centralized location with one click, by the way, and comparing that data, red, yellow, green. Is this a new asset, an existing asset, a suspected duplicate asset? And even better, involving your customer to approve them. Because they're not our assets, right? They're your customer's assets.
Customer approval? They're going to document in your tool, Tim?
Yes, absolutely. So it has been a huge area of, CIS, right? IG1, right? Asset governance. Where is the stuff? It might be in our PSA. It might be on our RMM. It might be in Senteon. It might be in tool X, Y, or Z. But what do we do with that data? Nothing. Why? Because we haven't had asset scorecard from compliance scorecard to be able to fully govern that with your customer approving it along the way. Pretty excited about this one. It is now literally live on our platform as of 40 minutes ago.
That is awesome. It's quite the time to be doing webinars. I mean, new updates go out. Usually people have questions about it, but thanks
Tim,
for joining.
Let me ask just a stupid question. Why is all that important?
Well, because they always say you can't protect what you don't know, right?
I'm talking about compliance scorecard beyond just the asset management in whole.
Yeah, so let's take the CIS example, right? And so, working through this amazing project with the CIS team and Matt Lee, Zach's been part of it. I've been part. We've had this great working group together. And when you look at every one of the 18 domains, there's a govern function. There's a documentation function. And it's not just CIS, it's almost every framework. And even more so, cyber insurance is starting to ask, do you have an incident response plan? And so MSPs are looking for a way to operationalize and standardize how they deal with documentation. And I've been writing documents for 20 years in SharePoint and spreadsheets and crappy permissions and all the things. And I was like, no more. This doesn't work that way. So we built governance as a service as a new sort of blue ocean concept into helping MSPs solve the governing function. Oh, awesome. And wait a minute. Didn't NIST just release a whole new domain on governance? Literally yesterday? So I hate to say, and I don't love talking in absolutes, but I feel like we are the first, the absolute, I hate that, but we're the first governance as a service platform dedicated to MSPs.
It's
And
awesome, Tim.
I
Love
love the way you introduced it at the beginning, Tim. You know, you said we help make the scorecard. I mean, you can't have a score without knowing what you're counting, right? So you guys are taking it from square zero for an MSP who's never had to follow policies, create policies, and in the background, I know we were talking before the episode, you're creating training material to not only educate what a policy is, but why it's important, who needs to be involved, and all the training around it. So kudos to you and being ahead of the curve before NIST even released this to have a solution in place.
Well, I like to think in blue ocean strategies, right? And that's been a great book for people that haven't read it. You should, because there are blue ocean strategies for MSPs. Think about, well, I don't know, endpoint hardening as a blue ocean for you, right? As a way to secure the endpoint for your customer. And I wonder if there's a tool. Oh yeah, Senteon can help you with that.
Exactly.
Heard of
I
that.
mean, you're running into the same thing that Senteon has really been educating is this is an area that wasn't prioritized, wasn't focused, but is a foundational step to securing your environment and just understanding your environment. So again, really excited to be doing that integration with you and your company and can't wait to see what the outcome is of that. But
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the MSPs, giving them the tools, the people, even more so, and the process to protect our small businesses.
yeah. Now
Well
today
said.
we do have a long setting conversation today. Remote desktop
Sure.
services is not a short or small topic, and a majority of MSPs listening in today, imagine, have used the RDP service, right? So, fun fact, CIS has 19 different recommendations to secure your RDP process just through GPO. 19
Only
settings,
only
only
19?
19.
Why not 20? Like round number. Divisible by 4. I do one a month.
I don't think we need another page to that PDF anymore, Tim. But we're going to be going into those 19 settings, and we do have a time constraint because Mr. Popular does have another webinar to get to after this. Really excited to catch up on that one as well. But Tim, let's dive right into the topic: remote desktop services at the highest level. Just explain to the audience what this is.
So, RDP, the ability to be able to remotely connect to a machine from one machine to the other. That's the simplest terms. And it's also probably one of the largest exploited things and not protected well. I mean, what is this, 2024, and we're still talking RDP?
Yep.
Yeah, so RDP in a nutshell, I'm here and I want to control Zach's computer through remote desk protocol, RDP, right? And I have some fun anecdote stories that I could talk about, but I know we're a little time constrained because back in the day,
Just one. Let's go.
all right. So there's a couple of pieces specifically around RDP and specifically in a registry setting where we could modify end users' backdrops. We could flip their screens upside down so the taskbar was up here and everything was backwards. We could remotely get into somebody else's machine. And I did this with a couple of the devs. Yes, I know I was a bad actor. Still a bad actor. Have you seen it? And like mess with their icon, like move things, and then be like, wait a minute, where'd my icon? And do stuff. And it would drive some of our devs kind of nutty, like, where'd my shortcut go?
Your settings weren't correct, bro.
I know. But this was, way back in the day. Obviously, we don't do that now because integrity is very important to us as a compliance company.
Yep.
Sure.
But that's a great example. These RDP settings can be that initial foothold so that additional damage or annoyance can be implemented onto that device without approval. So perfect high level.
Is, an actual bad guy is not going to mess around with shortcuts and the orientation of the menu bar. They're going to be sneaky and do something far worse. So that's the risk.
Yes.
And he doesn't want you to know he's there, right? So he may just be living in the background with access, waiting for a specific attack technique to work, waiting for a certain action to happen. So locking down this RDP is just absolutely critical. So let's go ahead and dive into this first slide here, reviewing some of these MITRE attack techniques. And the big thing with this slide and the CIS benchmarks as a whole is these settings we talk about week after week mitigate the risk of any of these attack techniques being successful. So let's talk about a few of these, Tim. I know we're cut short on time, but obviously remote services is the big topic here. And you already explained that one, why we don't want a bad actor to get in. But call out a couple of these for us.
Well, since we're a dog company, I know Checkers isn't here today. Checkers is on our way to Right of Boom next week. But network sniffing, right? The ability to be able to poke around, sniff around, smell out what's there, and then make lateral movements, right? So while they may have gotten one machine, as they start to sniff the network, they can then determine other vulnerable machines, and now they're gaining a stronger foothold, right? If you think about the castle walls, we might have guards guarding the actual gate, but they've ignored the tunnel under the wall. And once they exploit that and they sniff around the castle wall and realize, no one's protecting the sewer, sorry, and there's multiple sewers to get into. Now they have a stronger foothold because they've sniffed around the castle walls and have found other points of gaining a stronger presence and a stronger foothold.
That's a really good example. And in the sewer analogy, right, there may even be a closed door, right? But if that door isn't locked, the bad actor who found the tunnel can just open the door. If you don't secure these settings, like locking the door, it's that much easier. And that's exactly what we're going to cover here. Tim, you want to call out another one of these?
So I like the hiding of the artifacts because that relates a little bit to what, we talked about earlier, right? And so, I mentioned moving shortcuts and so on and so forth. But, removing log files, hiding the, things that you may hopefully have in place that log where you are, that kind of keep track of that stuff, like being able to sort of hide those things, right? Or the deleting temporary folders or those kinds of things along the way, right? Hiding artifacts, much like I mess with the developers' shortcuts and icons on their desktop.
Yeah, but those artifacts are critical for detection as well as response. So,
exactly.
By being able to manage those logs properly, you can realize that someone is having malicious behavior in your network sooner.
Well, even think of it this way: if I'm a bad actor, Brad Pitt or Bradley Grove or somebody, right? Like, if I'm Taylor Swift as a bad actor, and I'm creating folders to put stuff in, to execute stuff in, and I'm doing that work kind of behind the scenes, buried deep, where you might not see me on first glance, to then deploy different payloads, and I delete those folders or I delete temporary folders. Like, if that setting isn't set and I can come in, do some, malicious bad actor, whatever stuff, and then delete my traces. Now, any of your SOC, SIEM, SOAR, EDR, all the MR, all the XR things can't pick it up.
Right.
Yep. And one I want to call out before we move on from this slide is modifying the authentication process. We were talking about this before we entered the webinar was, hey, if you're an MSP RDPing today, it may work just fine, right? But it may not be as secure as it needs to be. So if you do implement some of these settings we talk about today, and you can no longer RDP successfully, that probably means the way you're trying to do it isn't secure to a standard that's acceptable, right? You want to make sure you follow these settings, test to make sure you can still RDP, but if it's broken, probably means you should change the way you RDP as opposed to loosening these settings.
These settings do work. They've been tested. They are recommended. And as Zach said, if these implementation of these settings causes you stress, you're probably doing something wrong to start with.
Well, and you bring up a good point, right? So as somebody that has Senteon deployed in our environment and have been with you for a really long time.
Thank you, Tim.
Working through that. When I was at my MSP, I'm not there anymore, obviously, but working through some of these things, right? And realize, and not, okay, when I was less mature, having less understanding, looking at some of these controls and, I'm an MSP. I need click and go. I want one click fix. I don't want to think about stuff. Click and go. And before I knew it, yeah, and Zach had to educate me. Senteon had to help me. Like, oh, I just locked myself out of everything, and Senteon made me mad at you. You broke my stuff, and I was like, well, hold on. We didn't break your stuff. In fact, we made it more secure because the way you were doing it is very insecure. And so, even modifying a couple of these settings might feel like the tool, the vendor, the Senteon, the thing broke it. It actually made you more secure. It made your customer more secure. And so, 1,500 pages educating, that's the real important piece, is to make sure, yeah, we should be doing this. We should be locking our stuff down, but we should also understand the why, right?
Yep.
You hear me talk a lot about Tim was the Mr. No, and I was always Mr. No because I never talked about the why. So as you're looking to implement these controls, reach out to the experts that know exactly what they do before you click and go, right? In compliance, there is no checkbox. In security, there is no checkbox without understanding the why behind it.
That is a perfect explanation. And CIS, Rich, myself, I mean, we are happy to be those experts and be available. But Tim, above all, thank you for the live testimonial. But what you said is critical that I really want to say a second time is when you started with Senteon, you had to learn. You kind of accepted that you weren't the expert in this 1,500 page PDF, caused a little bit of disruption, and had to reach out for additional help, right? And that's the coolest thing about this webinar series. We have some of the most respected guests in the space, you included, Tim, and I'm told all the time, hey, I had to Google this setting so that I could talk about it on your webinar. That's okay. Google it, learn the settings. You're the guest on this episode. We don't expect you to know everything, but you're mature enough and becoming more mature to where you can talk about it. So had to call that out a second time. And you did echo something that was said the other week by our guest, Marty Godsey. When he implemented the CIS benchmarks with Senteon, a few of their machines on one of their clients had trouble logging in anymore. Now, is that Senteon breaking it? Or is it just a hardened setting causing a login issue? And it illuminated a larger issue that their domain controller was out of date and using deprecated authentication protocols. So these CIS benchmarks we talk about, if implemented appropriately, can illuminate bigger issues at either your business or your client's business. So wanted to say that all a second time, Tim, because that was just absolutely spot on.
So let me just ask this question, because I know you're going to ask me about controls and dig into, and I know we were going to dig into them here, and I know we're bantering way over than we should.
We are.
Can I just block the port on the firewall and pretend we're done here? Because I hear that a lot, right? Like, block the port on the firewall and we're good.
You can, but then you're done. End of story.
Yeah. So as like the very first piece before we even knew Senteon or endpoint hardening existed in a automated manner like Senteon can do, I was living and breathing GPO. I was writing batch scripts. I was digging deep into registry settings. And we did block it at the firewall, but that didn't mean our endpoints were actually safe and secure. That didn't mean just because they might not have been able to get through a particular firewall port, there are other ways these bad actors can get into your network. And then if these settings aren't taken care of at the endpoint level, lateral movement, all of those things we just talked about a few minutes ago. So blocking the port at the firewall, while be a good band-aid, isn't the actual fix of maybe sewing the wound up, getting the antibiotic on it, and taking the rest that you need to actually heal the wound.
You're the metaphor god, man. That is a perfect example. That's always been one of my most enjoyable conversations with you, because you always help me relate what we do to other topics, and spot on. But let's kill the banter. Let's get into the educational portion of the show. Let's hop into this first setting here. This one, intuitively very obvious here, but we're making sure that do not allow passwords to be saved is set to enabled. Again, reading these GPOs, these are verbatim from Microsoft. Please reread, double read. There's a lot of double negatives, so do not and enabled. Anyway, Tim, please explain the obvious to us. Why do we want to make sure passwords can't be saved?
As the highly dyslexic, do not and enable, just what? So yeah, obviously, I mean, this is pretty easy. Like, if we have saved passwords and they have the hashes and they can get those passwords, lateral movement, deeper foothold, stronger foothold. I don't really have to talk a lot about don't save my password. I mean, how many times have we talked about passwordless authenticate? Not even the endpoint. Yeah. Protect those passwords. Don't save them damn things. Make sure you have a password and make sure you lock it down on the endpoint.
Yeah. And one thing that you just said with passwordless, I think something a lot of people don't realize, and I had to kind of teach myself, is that's just another variation of hardening that device. The word hardening isn't talked about, but there's a lot of innovative solutions like passwordless solutions, like Traitware, right? They'll be on the show in a couple weeks here. They have a passwordless solution, which is just another form of hardening that password policy. So,
yep. And you know, how many people reuse passwords, right? And if it's saved, right? And if it's saved, and you the first thing the bad actor is going to do is, I've gotten a password, I'm going to try it everywhere I can.
Yep. All right, let's go to this next setting here. Another one that seems straightforward, but again, this is not enabled by default. So this one here says on server specific, restrict remote desktop services users to a single RDP session is set to enabled. Why don't we want multiple running at the same time?
Of course.
What if two engineers want to work from the server, Tim? Like, isn't that disruptive to the MSP?
Well, it can be. I mean, it's resource intensive, right? I don't know, like, what if the MSPs are like standardizing on machines with multiple, gigs of RAM, multiple CPUs, multiple cores. Like, number one, it's resource intensive, right? And so, and then being able to, well, we're going to get into this a little bit later, being able to track that. Who is that? Where are they? Right? Being able to figure out, like, we have 5 sessions. Which one is really the bad actor, or are they all the bad actors?
Yeah, a bad actor could just leave a session open.
Yeah.
Yep. And we'll be getting into that too.
It's definitely about making sure that we know who is doing what and where, and controlling that access appropriately to be able to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, who, what, where, when, how, and why. And if you have 5 sessions on a machine at once and something breaks, who was it? Not even from a security perspective. Who was it?
Right.
What did you run that broke the thing? Especially on a server that, might be a critical infrastructure piece.
You're increasing your time for troubleshooting, right?
That too.
And I'm stepping out of my lane here with this question. So Tim, just correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't you document a policy also saying only one person can RDP from the server at a time? Like, is that a policy documentation, or is that something else entirely?
So it would actually, in our opinion, be both, right? So you would have a policy outlining who has access to what, right? So outlining an access control policy, right? Like determining the who, what, where, when, how, and why. And then you would follow that up with a procedure saying, enable this setting. Enable, I have to make sure, double negative.
You are correct here.
This setting to make sure that you are adhering to your access control policy. So yeah, both, like being able to say, I have something documented, I have a procedure to back that up, and then we're following that procedure to ensure that, I guess in this case, enable, we're not allowed to do that stuff. So yeah, absolutely. For me, I'm always going to say it starts with your policies, your procedures, and ensure that your customer is included in that conversation along the way.
Nice. All right, let's go to this next setting here. Allow users to connect remotely by using the RDS services is set to disabled. So isn't this the point of RDS, to connect remotely? I'm a little confused here. Why is this recommended to be disabled?
Again, the whole enable, disable disabled, right? Just keep throwing this stuff at me, Zach. I'm like, all right. So I'm rereading and I'm digging through, right?
You're good. I'm pretty sure this is an L2 setting from CIS, and of course it's more secure. Like you said, just block the port, right? This is effectively, I believe, would break the RDS service altogether if this is actually followed, which is why I believe this is an L2 setting.
Yeah, and essentially being able to prevent sensitive workstation environments, being able to prevent external threats and any of that kind of stuff, right? So locking, disabling. You're killing me on the enable disable.
Yeah.
Hey, it's
Right.
verbatim from Microsoft. Senteon has no influence on the word choices in these slides.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a struggle. Are you moving on to the next
Yep,
one?
nope, that one makes sense. So let's go to this next one here. Allow UI automation redirection is set to disabled. So again, this is talking like an automated redirection stuff that maybe isn't approved. So kind of makes sense intuitively here that CIS recommends to have this disabled. But can you talk a little bit more towards this?
Oh, you mean like redirecting my documents folder to some place, or redirecting my desktop to some other place, or redirecting sensitive data folders to like
Stuff like that.
bad actor Dropbox, or
I mean, what could go wrong, right?
nothing could go wrong there, right? And then automation of that, right? So when we were at the MSP, we set up profiles so that their desktops and their documents folder, some of those things were redirected to OneDrive so that backup and like the convenience of having redirection based on end users, but the automation of that and blocking that automation, because if I'm a bad actor, I've come through the tunnel under the castle wall, and now I want to automate deploying all my little things around the internet, around the castle walls,
Push
and
data right out that same tunnel.
Yeah, and then redirecting the king's influx of gold out that tunnel hole, right? Because to them it looks like it's the same tunnel, but I've redirected that behind the scenes because I've automated that behind the scenes, and now the king's gold's going out the back door.
Yep. And that's the big thing with these CIS benchmarks, right? We're reducing the ways an attacker can evade that EDR or the additional security layers that are already in place. So perfect example there. This next one here, do not allow COM port redirection is set to enabled. Believe this has to do with port access and hardware-based attacks. But again, another redirection here, Tim.
Well, this people are like, COM ports, do they even exist anymore on devices? Like, we're all, USB-C these days. But in the manufacturing space, our DoD friends, right? They have a lot of devices that are driven by COM ports, right? They have their CNC machines. They have a lot of things that are, driven by COM ports. And so if I'm a bad actor and I like break into Lockheed Martin and I can redirect those CNC instructions out of COM port to someplace else, to China, then we have the new F7000 showing up in China because we've now taken that data, redirected it to us. So COM ports feels like, oh, that's an old technology. We're all USB-C these days. Well, no, we're not. They still kind of exist, especially in like the defense industrial base or CMMC machines. CNC machines. Sorry, my mouth is getting ahead of me.
You're good. All right, we'll keep pace going, given we have a 15-minute hard stop here. This next setting here is do not allow drive redirection. So a lot of these settings have to do with redirection here, but tell us again if there's another story with this, but drive redirection. Why do we also want to not allow this?
Well, if anybody has ever set up their Google Drive, it creates sometimes a G drive on your computer, right? And so if I can go in behind the scenes and redirect your G drive to some other place, now I've got all your Google stuff. And I know MSPs Microsoft. Well, tell me a client that doesn't have some kind of Google Drive.
Yep.
I'll wait. Right. So
even if the MSP doesn't know about it, you just have to accept someone at that environment is using it.
Exactly. And so when you connect your Google Drive and it creates a fictitious virtual drive, and I can go in the back end and redirect that. Hey, thanks for giving me a Google Drive.
Right.
Yep. Awesome.
It's
All right.
just a good way to lose information from employees in general, right?
That's a big thing of all these settings we're talking about, right? It's mitigating the risk if a foothold is gained, right? You're limiting what they can do after they're in, right? These are all just defense in depth settings. Yep. So let's go to this next one here. Do not allow location redirection.
Oh, you mean again, if I walk in one door and I wind up in a different room
or country?
Or country. If I go through, one sewer tunnel and I come out on the other end because I was expecting to come out. All right. Love this. So I just redirected the king's ransom and the king's crown jewels because I automated that, but then I redirected it to the wrong location and I sent it to Zach instead of sending it to Rich. Rich becomes wealthy. Me as the bad actor realized I screwed that up and I'm in the wrong location.
Perfect. All right. And this next setting, and we have quite a few more redirection settings, but this one here is
let's blow through the redirection. If you really want to get into every single one of these, I would imagine that there's a couple of other non-redirection questions. Can we just summarize and say,
all right, LPT port, give a quick high level.
Redirecting printers. Really? So, okay. I work in finance and I print checks.
Yep. And, perfect.
And those checks wind up in Rich.
And the next setting here, do not allow supported plug and play device redirection. Really quick again, plug and play. Why don't we want that redirection?
Disable plug and play, period, because auto launch on plug and play and being able to auto launch executables because of plug and play.
Yep.
Plug and spray.
All right. And the last redirection setting, do not allow web authn redirection is set to enabled. Tell us what this is. This looks a little bit more technical.
Yeah, this is really about credentials, right? And being able to exploiting the ability to gather and redirect credentials surrounding, web authentication or web authn, if you want to use the shortened version. It's critical for maintaining that integrity of any web-based applications. Fortunately, Compliance Scorecard has that dealt with, and Senteon has that dealt with. Well, maybe I shouldn't make that claim, but I know we do, right? So
we support the settings we talk about in this show.
So making sure that we're not being able to redirect, user methods and user authenticate, that stuff is like gold to bad actors.
Perfect. All right, let's switch gears. We're going to go deeper into these RDS settings here. Again, another password one, but obvious one. Why do we want whoever's remoting in to be forced to put in a password every time?
Verification. Are you who you say you are? At least
you don't know who's walking up.
Yep. No need to expand more on that. Let's get into some of these really fun settings here. So the first one, require secure RPC communication is set to enabled. So again, this is one of those settings that may cause disruption to an MSP if they have some deprecated methods being used. It's a legacy environment. But tell us why we would want to use secure RPC.
That one word, encryption.
Yep.
Do we always talk about data at rest and data in transit encryption, right? Ensuring that those packets are encrypted appropriately, that they're being sent back and forth appropriately. Yeah, encryption is the word.
Yeah. And do you have any more you can share why this might cause disruption, or maybe an example you can share why this might break an existing workflow?
Bad key value pairs, right? Not having, so I just want to spend 6 hours talking about this stuff.
We could do a whole nother session just about the next 5 settings, I'm sure.
Even so the days of everybody in the office working together and remoting to the machine and helping out. Those are kind of by the wayside. But years ago, I would remote desktop to a person and help them over RDP. All internally, that's fine. The port's blocked at the firewall, but was that data encrypted? Am I like, and so by enabling, not to say, by enabling that, now I didn't have the capacity because I didn't have the right certificates, I didn't have the right decryption things on either end, and I wasn't able to do the work because I wanted to be more secure. So I created and enabled the settings so that I am data at rest and data in transit encrypted, and I didn't have the right key value pairs or the right RPC server, dealing with those exchanges back and forth through Active Directory and blah blah blah. Like, so yeah, it can break stuff, but rightfully so, because if it is breaking stuff, you're probably not as secure as you think you should be or as you think you are.
I will scream that from the mountains every day. All right, next setting here, require use of specific security layer for RDP connection. So this is recommending SSL here, Tim.
Well, I mean, we do everything over HTTP, right? Because
that's the only way to do it. It's the easiest.
This is where Google really took a stand years ago and basically forced, hey, if we're going to index websites, they're all going to be over HTTPS. Now they're doing the same thing with DMARC and DKIM, right? And so enabling the SSL allows us to have that secure socket layer, that secure transaction from here to there in that tunnel back and forth, right? So why are we even talking about SSL anymore? Why is this not secure by default? Thanks, Microsoft.
That's a great question. And Rich, to do the CIS benchmark plug, a lot of these settings are L1. They are recommended for every single MSP out there, regardless of your maturity level. So these are the basics.
The basics. Right. You got to follow them.
Yep. All right. Keeping pace here. I know we have the cutoff coming up soon. This next setting here is require user authentication for remote connections by using the network level authentication. So this sounds like it's adding a whole layer of authentication to it, Tim.
It is, and it's, about pre-validating the user. It's about understanding, that full session is established. Are they who they are? Do we know where they came from? It's critical to, strengthen the additional, like, what do we talk about? What's the word? Oh, yeah, onion. No, wait, defense in depth. Right? Defense in depth, right? It adds another layer, just like the onion does, right?
Yeah, if you're going to go to the level of building, network level authentication, why bypass it, right? You put it there for a reason.
Exactly.
All right, let's go to this next setting here. So set client connection encryption level. So this is now talking about on the client side, and CIS does recommend this to be enabled at a high level. Another one that kind of sounds like it could be a little disruptive, but explain why this is important.
So, I mean, as Rich just pointed out, like, why is it that we start to put this layers of the onion and defense in depth if we're going to just miss a piece, like, miss a piece, like, hey, I did it all for me, but I didn't do it on the other side, right? So I locked the door, I put the alarm system on it, but the window next to it's wide open. I mean, why have defense in depth if you're not going to take it all the way through?
That is damn good. All right, next setting here, set time limit. We did just talk about this at the beginning. So set time limit for active but idle remote desktop service sessions. So CIS recommends if it's idle for 15 minutes, or less, to have it locked down or locked out rather, so they have to re-authenticate. Explain why this is important.
It's interesting that it says 15 minutes. So as part of one of the things that we did at Compliance Scorecard was setting timeouts for inactive sessions. And I hate to say it, but it pissed off a huge portion of our user base because they kept getting logged out after 20 minutes. And I can't tell you the number of requests I got from partners saying, can we change that to be more than 20 minutes? And I'm like, no. But doing it on the workstation, right? Doing it here with protecting that endpoint, like, yeah, maybe 15 minutes is a little tight, but how long does it take for something like Matt Lee always puts the pictures out of every
Doesn't take him long at all.
Right? All you need to do is walk by, grab that machine, and if it doesn't auto log out
yep,
you're in. Done.
Hey, question from John in the chat.
Oh, I don't know why I'm not seeing the live chats, but if we can toss that on the screen, we can definitely address it. So, Tim, why Microsoft new laptop need a? Oh man, that is totally off topic, but I fully agree with this question. Tim, 30 seconds. You got an opinion on why Microsoft is forcing you to make it a Microsoft account in order to launch a new computer?
Moving right along.
Moving right along. We do.
Revenue generation is the short answer.
I do love the question, but you don't have to talk towards it if you don't want to.
I mean, ideally, it's about like if you're in a Microsoft account and you're now within the Microsoft ecosystem, as Microsoft starts to think about secure by default, like forcing two-factor, like forcing multiple-factor authentication. Beforehand, I could just build a computer and not have any of this stuff. And now, just like Google did with HTTPS, Microsoft is now taking, some of that stance of let us help you start to secure some of these things by having, the appropriate accounts and things around that. So
in my opinion as well, it's around licensing too. They're looking for a license key at setup, and they also want to attach you to the Microsoft ecosystem with their store and all that kind of give you options to buy more stuff. As well as it's important for updates, honestly. It is sort of important to get regular updates is one thing.
Yeah, we talked about the store, right, Zach? Because I tried, once I rolled Senteon out, I forgot that I did the thing so I can't get to the store anymore. And I'm like, what the hell? Oh.
Yep. CIS does recommend to disable the public Microsoft Store, only allowing the private store. So that is the setting Tim's talking about. And to wrap up on this setting here, as we do have a time crunch, we're talking about that machine inactivity timeout. For that last setting we had on the screen, and this one, for example, it's only talking about the RDP. There's a whole nother setting to lock the general screen if you're not in an RDP session. Again, this is just defense in depth. A lot of settings sound similar, but you got to look at the pathways to configure it. They all relate. Anyway, moving on. This next setting here, set time limit for disconnected sessions to enabled 1 minute. If we can pull up this next slide here.
What am I going to? The idle remote one?
The set time limit for disconnected sessions. So yeah, this is just making sure you can't re-sign back in after you sign out. That's what this is saying, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously you're disconnected. You want to make sure that they so I'm going to wrap this all up in a nice bow, right? Because I know we've talked a lot of unique settings here around RDP. First and foremost, just lock it down, right? We know RDP is one of the biggest, and I don't want to say one of the biggest. It is well exploited. There's enough things around the interwebs, right? Maybe you want to kind of bounce towards the end. I'm going to wrap this up in a pretty little bow.
We have two more settings if you want to knock those out first. All right, these next two settings are pretty similar. So we have do not delete temp folders upon exit. And then the next setting, if we want to pull that up as well, do not use temporary folders per session. So
kind of rehashes, but
what's the importance of making sure these folders are kept and they're not temporary, Tim?
Covering your tracks, or in the case of defer, right? In the event of something happening, you want to be able to know where they come from, like how they got there, where are they, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to fill in the sewer hole in the sewers and pretend they don't exist, I'll never know where they came from. And I will be, really challenging to figure out how to block them again.
Or right? You're burning down the castle to cover your tracks.
Yeah, burning down the castle, right? And so it's funny. I know we keep making these castle references, um, probably because I just put together a whole webinar on walking the IT knight through all of this defense in depth stuff. But here's the thing: let me wrap this all up pretty neatly, as quickly as I can, as efficiently as I can. RDP is a big area of exploitation. Some of these settings, albeit not very many, can be slightly disruptive. But the reason why they're disruptive is because they're making you and your customer more secure in the long run. I can't believe it's 2024. We're still talking about RDP, just like we're talking about two-factor authentication, right? Lock it up, as Matt, our good friend Matt Lee, always says. Walking by a laptop that doesn't have any of this stuff in an airport, you or any bad actor can literally walk right over because you didn't set the timeouts, or you locked the door, you put the alarm system on it, but the two windows on either side of the door you left wide open with gold sitting right in front of it.
Yep. That's a perfect bow on this today's conversation. Again, that endpoint, that user machine is going to be the point of entry, 9 times out of 10, making up that statistic. But anything we can do to harden these attack surfaces, reduce the ways a bad actor can take advantage of it, that's what we need to do. And that's why Senteon was made. And that's why CIS has all the recommendations that they do. And now that's why NIST and regulatory frameworks are starting to talk about security configurations, the need for a baseline, proving the baseline, tracking changes. All of this goes into what Tim talked about today. And Tim, thank you for being a stellar guest. Thank you for putting the bow on it. You can drop off while I conclude the rest of the show, but thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. As always, thank you for having me. For those of you that will be at Right of Boom in Vegas next week, feel free to stop by. We love to shake hands. We'll have coffee bar. And for those of you that won't be, and you're maybe at CompTIA CCF the following week, love to meet up, get a cup of coffee, have a conversation. Back to back, Right of Boom, CCF at CompTIA. We'll be out and about. Zach, Rich, thank you so much for having me. Always a big fan. And yeah, we'll catch you on the flip side.
Awesome. We'll have you back for browser hardening settings in the future, Tim.
Good stuff there too.
Thanks,
Very
Tim.
cool.
Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers.
So, Rich, obviously this was the Tim Golden show. He had a lot of good things to say. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to these RDP settings, or just a bow you want to put on before I wrap up the show?
Just nothing that we haven't talked about before. I mean, it's about the basics, right? A lot of people are focused on the new tech and the latest EDR technology and all that, but all the best technology that you can buy is not going to protect you if you don't have the basics configured properly. And I think that's really the big takeaway from where I'm at.
I think that's perfect. And a lot of times, even if you have the new technology implemented, it's not even configured sometimes. It's not even doing as much as you can. And that's a big challenge for MSPs that I talk to and work with, right? Make sure you know your software, know your assets, and that it's actually set up.
Huge problem.
Shelfware is a huge thing. So, all right, everyone, thank you for being here this week. Next week, we have another great episode with Corey Kirkendall. If we could pull up that next slide here. We'll be reviewing some RSS feeds and highlight the slide. Cool. We'll be talking about RSS feeds and a few more settings. And then we have JD hopping in to talk about Windows Defender Smart Screen and good old Xbox settings, I believe, are in that as well. And then we are coming up to Heath Spencer, another vendor, joining us to talk about some of his passwordless technology and some of these CIS benchmark settings of how he handles them. So very cool. And this last slide here. Yeah, this last slide here. Rich and I are always happy to connect on LinkedIn. We are very active here. And if you ever wanted to get an assessment of your own CIS benchmarks in your own environment, Senteon does offer this completely free. Sign up with that QR code and you can see where you stand today. But thank you, everyone, for being here. And I will catch you next